The weight of a certificate, the red soil of her father's compound had never felt so heavy under her feet. Gozi sat on the low concrete wall of the porch, watching the dust motes dance in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the corrugated iron roof. It was a dance she had watched 1,000 times before, as a child chasing chickens, as a teenager reading novels in this very spot, as a young woman dreaming of a future that now seemed to be slipping through her fingers like the fine red powder beneath her soles. Her NISC discharge certificate, still crisp and smelling of fresh ink, lay on her lap like a cruel joke. She had picked it up from the secretariat 3 days ago, walking on air the entire journey home. She remembered how she had clutched it to her chest, how strangers on the bus had smiled at her radiant face, how she had whispered a prayer of thanks to her father in heaven. "See, Papa? I did it. I finished, just as you wanted." But now, on this quiet Thursday afternoon, the certificate felt like a mockery, a piece of paper that proclaimed her qualifications to the world, while the world responded with silence. 5 years at the University of Benin, 5 years of trekking from one lecture hall to another under the scorching sun, 5 years of squeezing out the little her parents could send, making one meal stretch like rubber, sleeping on a hard mattress in a cramped room with 3 other girls who became her sisters, 5 years of late night, reading with kerosene lamps when the electricity failed, of borrowing notes when she missed classes, of sacrificing new clothes and outings so she could buy the recommended textbooks. She had done it all. She had graduated with a second-class upper in business administration. Her father had cried at her graduation, something she had never seen him do before. "My daughter," he had kept repeating, holding her face in his weathered hands. "My daughter, the graduate. Patrick Okafor's daughter is a graduate." That was 18 months ago, 18 months since that proud moment. Now her father was gone, and the certificate on her lap seemed to weigh more than all her years of struggle combined. She looked around the compound that had been her home since birth. It was modest by any standard for rooms arranged in a rectangle, with a shared parlor that doubled as her mother's sitting area and a kitchen that was really just a covered space at the back where they cooked with firewood and charcoal. The walls were once painted a cheerful yellow, but years of harmat and dust and rainy season dampness had faded them to a dull, patchy color. The zinc roof, patched in 3 places after the last windstorm, rattled whenever the wind blew hard. This compound had always felt like enough when her father was alive. Now it felt like a cage. "You are still sitting out here?" The voice came from behind her, and Gozi turned to see her mother, Adana, standing in the doorway. She was wrapped in a well-worn wrapper, one hand gripping the doorframe for support, the other holding a small cup of the bitter herbal mixture she took every afternoon for her cough. Even from where she sat, Gozi could hear the rattle in her mother's chest, the wet sound that never seemed to go away, no matter how many concoctions she drank or how many prayers she prayed. "Mama, you should be resting. The doctor said you need to." The doctor said many things. Her mother waved a dismissive hand and made her way slowly to sit beside Gozi on the concrete wall. The movement cost her. Gozi could see it in the way she paused halfway, in the slight tremor of her hands as she lowered herself down. "The doctor also said I should take expensive drugs we cannot afford." "So what is rest without medicine?" Gozi had no answer. She reached out and took her mother's hand, feeling the thinness of it, the papery skin over fragile bones. Her mother had never been a big woman, but grief and illness had whittled her down to almost nothing. The cough had started a few months after Papa's burial, and it had only grown worse with time. "I was thinking about your father today," Adana said softly, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the compound wall. "How he would walk through that gate every evening whistling some old high life tune. You remember how he used to whistle?" Gozi nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She remembered everything. She remembered how he would come back from work, remove his shoes at the doorstep, and call out, "Adana, Gozi, your provider is home." She remembered how he would sit in this very spot under the evening sky and tell them stories about his day at the local government secretariat. She remembered how he would pat her head and say, "My daughter will work in a bigger office than mine one day. She will wear suits and sit in air conditioning. I remember, Mama. He believed in you so much." Adana's voice cracked slightly. All those his friends, those big men he used to drink palm wine with, they saw how he glowed when he talked about you. "My Gozi this, my Gozi that. They all promised to help you when you finished." They said it with their whole chest, drinking his wine, eating his food. Gozi felt the familiar bitterness rise in her throat, the promises, the endless empty promises. Chief Ibuka, her father's supposed best friend, the supervisor at the ministry who had slapped his chest and declared, "Patrick, your daughter is my daughter. Once she finishes her service, just send her to my office. I will sort her out myself." After Papa died, Gozi had called him 4 times. The first time he had sounded busy, but promised to call back. The second time his secretary said he was in a meeting. The third time he didn't pick up. The fourth time the number was no longer in service. Uncle Michael, the distant cousin who had made it big in Lagos, owner of a construction empire though no one had ever seen it, he had visited during Gozi's final year, flashing his gold watch and speaking in the elaborate pidgin of the Lagos elite. "My sister Piken, after your NISC, you don't need to stress yourself. Just come to Lagos. I get big company. I go give you management position. You hear? Management." He had even given her 5,000 naira as encouragement. Now he wouldn't pick her calls, and when she finally reached him through another relative, he had mumbled something about the economy being bad and positions being frozen. Mama Idu, the wealthy widow who ran the biggest provision store in the market, she had been at Papa's funeral crying like she had lost a brother. "Gozi, my daughter, your father was a good man. Anything you need, anything at all, you come to me. I will take care of you like my own." When Gozi had gone to her asking if she knew of any jobs, Mama Idu had suddenly become very busy, very distracted. "Ah, my dear, times are hard. Oh, these days even graduates are sweeping streets. But I will keep my ears open. Just keep praying." Keep praying, as if prayers could pay for her mother's medication, as if prayers could put food on the table, as if prayers could bring back her father and all the opportunities that died with him. "It's not their fault," Gozi heard herself say, though she didn't believe it. "They have their own families, their own problems." Her mother turned to look at her, and in those eyes was a wisdom that cut through all pretense. "My daughter, when a man is alive, he is useful to his friends. When he dies, even his bones are forgotten. That is the way of the world. But you," she squeezed Gozi's hand, "you must not let it harden your heart. There is still goodness. In this world, there must be." Gozi wanted to believe that. She truly did. But as she sat there watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound, she found it harder and harder to hold on to that belief. She thought about the past year, about how she had walked from office to office, dropping off applications and CVs until her feet blistered, about how she had stood in countless queues, only to be told at the end that there were no vacancies, or that they would call her they never did, or worse, that she needed to know somebody too. Even be considered, about how she had swallowed her pride and gone back to those same connections, only to be met with closed doors and averted eyes. The worst was when she had applied for a secretarial position at a microfinance bank in town. She had passed the written test, sailed through the first interview, and been called back for a final meeting with the branch manager. The manager, a fat man with sweaty palms and wandering eyes, had leaned across his desk and asked, "So, Miss Okafor, what else can you bring to this organization besides your degree?" She had pretended not to understand. He had made himself clearer. She had walked out. There were other offers, the kind that came with strings attached, the kind that required a pretty young graduate to be nice to certain men in certain ways. Each time Gozi had refused, clutching her dignity like a shield, even as hunger gnawed at her stomach and her mother's cough grew worse. "I saw Mrs. Okoro at the market today," her mother said, breaking into her thoughts. "You remember her? Her son is working with that big telecommunications company in Lagos." Gozi remembered. Mrs. Okoro was one of those women who took pleasure in other people's misfortune. She would come to the house, her face arranged in an expression of fake sympathy, and proceed to catalogue all the ways her children were succeeding while Gozi sat at home with her useless certificate. What did she want? She asked what you are doing now. I told her you are still searching. She said her son's company might have openings, but Adana paused. But what, Mama? But she said her son said they only employ people with connections, people who know people. Adana laughed bitterly, a sound that turned into a cough. Connections. The same thing your father had, the same thing that died with him. Gozi felt the familiar weight settle on her chest. It was always there now, this heaviness, this constant pressure that made it hard to breathe sometimes. She looked down at her certificate again, at her name printed in elegant font, at the seal of the university, at the signature of the vice-chancellor, all that work, all those sacrifices. And for what? When I was young, her mother said softly, we used to say that education was the key to everything. Your father and I, we sacrificed everything to send you to school. We sold extra yams from our small farm. We took loans. We went without so you could have. She paused, wiping her eyes with the edge of her wrapper. I still believe it, Gozi. I have to believe it. Because if education means nothing, then what was all the suffering for? Gozi put her arm around her mother, feeling the sharp bones of her shoulders. It means something, Mama. It has too. I just need one chance, just one person to look at my certificate and see beyond it, to see me. Your father used to say that you have a good heart, Adana whispered. He said that would take you further than any certificate. I pray every day that he was right. They sat in silence as the sun continued its slow descent. From somewhere in the neighborhood, the sound of a generator started up. Children's laughter drifted over the wall from the next compound. Life went on, indifferent to their struggles, their grief, their fading hope. Gozi thought about tomorrow. She would wake up early, as she always did. She would go to the boutique in the market where she worked for Mama Kalechi, standing on her feet for 12 hours, folding and refolding fabrics, listening to customers haggle over prices, enduring her boss's sharp tongue. She would earn her 300 naira for the day, barely enough for a single meal and a fraction of what her mother's drugs cost. She would come home exhausted, wash her one good set of clothes, and do it all over again. And somewhere in offices and companies across the city, people with her certificate were walking into air-conditioned buildings, sitting at clean desks, earning salaries that could change everything for her family. They had connections. They knew people. Their fathers were still alive. The bitterness rose again, and this time Gozi. Let it come. She was tired of fighting it, tired of pretending that everything would be okay, tired of smiling and saying God is in control when it felt like God had forgotten them completely. But even as the bitterness flooded her heart, a small voice whispered from somewhere deep inside. It was the voice that had kept her going through 5 years of university, through the grief of losing her father, through every closed door and every empty promise. It was the voice that said, not yet, not forever. Something will change. She didn't know what. She couldn't see how. But she held on to that voice, clutched it like a lifeline as the evening shadows grew longer and the red soil of her father's compound grew darker in the fading light. Tomorrow was another day, another chance, another possibility. She had to believe that. What else was there? The day everything changed, the harmattan had been harsh that year. Gozi remembered it clearly, how the dry, dusty wind had blown incessantly from the Sahara, coating everything in a fine layer of grit, cracking lips and skin, turning the mornings into a battle against cold and the afternoons into a struggle against the stinging particles that hung in the air. It was the harmattan of her final year. The season when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. She had been in the middle of revising for her last semester exams when the first call came. It was her mother's number, but the voice on the other end was not her mother's. It was their neighbor, Mrs. Adebayo, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush that Gozi's sleep-addled brain struggled to process. Gozi, Gozi, my daughter, you need to come home. Your father, something has happened to your father. The world had tilted in that moment. The textbook in her lap, open to a chapter on organizational behavior, had slid to the floor. Her roommates, who had been quietly reading by the light of the single bulb, had looked up at the sudden sharp intake of her breath. What happened? One of them had asked, Gozi, who is on the phone? But Gozi couldn't answer. She was already moving, shoving her feet into slippers, grabbing her small bag with trembling hands, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Please, somebody lend me transport money, she had whispered, her voice not sounding like her own. I need to get home. Something has happened to my father. Her roommates had scrambled, pooling their meager resources, pressing crumpled notes into her hands. Within 20 minutes, she was on a bus heading home, the familiar landscape blurring past the window as her mind raced through 1,000 terrifying possibilities. An accident, a sudden illness, theft, armed robbers. She had prayed during that journey, prayed with a desperation she had never known before. God, please let him be okay. Please let me find him alive. Please, please, please. By the time she reached the compound, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would forever after remind her of grief. She saw the crowd, first a cluster of people at the entrance to their home, their voices a low murmur that fell silent as she approached. She saw her mother's younger sister, Auntie Grace, standing at the gate, her face already wet with tears, and she knew before anyone spoke. She knew from the way Auntie Grace opened her arms, from the way the crowd parted to let her through, from the terrible stillness that hung over the compound like a shroud. "Gozy, my baby," Auntie Grace had sobbed, catching her as her legs gave way. "Your father is gone. He is gone, my child." The words made no sense. They were sounds without meaning, arranged in an order that defied comprehension. Gone? How could he be gone? She had spoken to him just 3 days ago, his voice warm and proud as he told her about the new shirt he had bought for her graduation. "My graduate daughter," he had called her. "Soon you will come home and we will celebrate properly that man could not be gone." She had pushed past her aunt, past the sympathetic faces of neighbors, past everything, until she stood in the doorway of her parents' room, and there she saw him. Her father lay on their bed, covered with a white sheet up to his chest. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful, as if he were merely sleeping. His hands were folded across his chest, and someone had placed a rosary between his fingers. For a terrible, disorienting moment, Gozy expected him to open his eyes and smile at her, to say, "Ah, my daughter, you came. I was just resting." But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He would never speak again. Her mother sat beside the bed, holding his hand, her body rocking gently back and forth. She wasn't wailing, wasn't crying loudly. Instead, she made a low, keening sound, a sound Gozy had never heard a human make before, a sound of such pure primal grief that it seemed to come from somewhere beyond words. "Mama," Gozy had whispered, moving toward her. Her mother looked up, and in her eyes Gozy saw the reflection of her own devastation. "He complained of a headache this morning," Adana said, her voice eerily calm. "Just a headache. He said he would lie down for a while. I made him tea. I brought it to him, and he was all ready." She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. The days that followed were a blur of activity and numbness. Relatives arrived from various villages. Neighbors brought food and offered condolences in voices hushed with shock. The church sent a delegation. The local government secretariat, where her father had worked for 23 years, sent a representative with a letter of condolence and an envelope containing his final paycheck and death benefits, a sum that seemed substantial until the funeral expenses began to mount. Gozy moved through it all like a sleepwalker. She helped prepare food for the mourners. She received guests with a fixed smile that hurt her face. She listened to countless people tell her what a good man her father was, how he would be missed, how heaven had gained an angel. She nodded at the appropriate moments, said, "Thank you," at the appropriate moments, cried at the appropriate moments, but inside she was frozen, hollow, unable to process that the bedrock of her life, the man who had believed in her without question, who had sacrificed everything for her future, was gone forever. It was during the burial preparation that the first cracks in the facade of support began to show. Uncle Pius, her father's elder brother, had arrived from the village with an air of authority that immediately set Gozy's teeth on edge. He was a large man with a loud voice and an opinion on everything, and he had wasted no time in taking charge. "We need to discuss the estate," he had announced on the second day, gathering the family in the small parlor. "Patrick was my brother. It is my duty to ensure everything is handled properly." The estate was a modest thing, the compound they lived in, a small plot of farmland in the village that had been in the family for generations, a few thousand naira in a savings account, and the death benefits from his job. But to Uncle Pius it seemed to represent something more. The compound, he had declared, is family property. It belongs to the Okafor family, not to any individual. It cannot be sold or transferred without the consent of the family elders. As the eldest surviving brother, I am now the head of the family, and I will oversee its management. Gozy's mother had sat silently, her face expressionless, but Gozy had felt the words like a slap. This was her home, the only home she had ever known, and now her uncle was talking about it as if it belonged to him. Auntie Adana can continue living here, of course, Uncle Pius had continued, waving a dismissive hand. That is not a problem. But if she ever decides to remarry or move elsewhere, the property reverts to the family. And as for the farmland, we will need to discuss how the proceeds from it will be shared. Gozi had opened her mouth to speak, but her mother's hand on her arm had stopped her. Later, in the privacy of their room, Adana had explained, "Your father's people are like that," she had said warily. "They see property, they see money. Your uncle has been waiting for this day, I think. He always resented that your father built this house in town instead of in the village where everyone could benefit from it. But Mama, this is ours. Papa built this with his money." "I know, my daughter, I know," Adana had sighed, a sound so heavy it seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "But the law and tradition are not always the same thing, and I am too tired to fight. Let them talk, let them scheme. God will protect what is meant for us." The burial itself was a blur of white wrappers and black clothes, of hymns sung in voices cracking with emotion, of dirt falling on a wooden casket, of her mother's keening rising above the crowd like a wounded animal's cry. Gozi had stood at the edge of the grave, throwing a handful of red soil onto her father's coffin, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. Childhood ended in that moment, not gradually, not gently, but with the finality of a door slamming shut. She was no longer Patrick Okafor's daughter, the graduate, the pride of the family. She was simply Gozi, a young woman with a dying mother, a scheming uncle, and a future that suddenly looked like a vast, empty wilderness. The weeks after the burial brought the real test. Gozi had to return to school to complete her final exams. It was perhaps the hardest thing she had ever done, leaving her mother alone in that house, surrounded by memories, while she went back to a world that suddenly seemed trivial and distant. How could she care about organizational behavior theories when her father was dead? How could she focus on marketing principles when her mother called every night with a cough that grew worse with each passing day? But she did it. She had to. Her father had believed in her education, and she would not let his death rob her of that. She threw herself into her studies with a desperation that surprised even herself, staying up late into the night, reading and rereading until the words blurred before her eyes. It was as if by succeeding academically, she could somehow honor his memory, could prove that his sacrifices had not been in vain. She graduated. She remembered standing in that crowded hall, wearing her gown and cap, scanning the audience for faces that weren't there. Her mother had been too ill to travel. Her father would never see this day. She had collected her certificate with a smile pasted on her face, and later, alone in her room, she had wept the call. To Uncle Michael came a week after her NISC posting was confirmed. She had waited until she was calm, until her voice would not betray the desperation she felt. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would remind him of his promises, how she would present herself as a capable, educated young woman ready to work. "Uncle Michael?" "Good afternoon, sir. This is Gozi, your cousin Patrick's daughter." A pause. Then, Gozi. "Yes, yes, Patrick's daughter. How are you, my dear? How is your mother?" The voice was warm, familiar. Hope flickered in her chest. "I am well, sir. Mama is managing. Uncle, I just finished my NISC, and I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last year. You mentioned that after my service I could come to Lagos and you would help me find something, a management position, you said." Another pause, longer this time. Gozi, my dear, you see, things have changed since then. The economy is not what it was. My company has had to downsize, you understand? We are letting people go, not hiring new ones. But Uncle, you said—" "I know what I said, and I meant it at the time. But the situation on ground is different now. These are hard times. You understand, don't you?" A clever girl like you, Gozi understood. She understood perfectly. The promises made to her father died with her father. She was just another graduate now, another face in the crowd, another voice on the phone asking for favors. "I understand, Uncle," she had said quietly. "Good girl, I knew you would. Keep trying. Oh, something. We'll come up and tell your mother I am praying for her." The line went dead. Gozi had sat there, holding the phone, feeling the hope drain out of her like water from a cracked pot. Chief Ibuka was next. She had dressed carefully for that visit, putting on her best clothes, practicing her posture, rehearsing her introduction. She had walked to the local government secretariat, ignoring the curious stares of the security guards, and asked to see the supervisor. Chief Ibuka is in a meeting, the secretary had said, not looking up from her computer. You can wait. She had waited. For 2 hours, she had sat on a hard plastic chair, watching people come and go, listening to snippets of conversation about contracts and payments and connections. Finally, Chief Ibuka had emerged, a tall, imposing man in an agbada that must have cost more than her family's monthly expenses. Chief, sir, she had said, rising quickly. I am Gozi Okafor, Patrick Okafor's daughter. You remember my father. His face had gone through a series of micro-expressions, recognition, then wariness, then a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ah, Patrick's daughter. Of course, of course. How are you, my dear? I was so sorry to hear about your father. A good man, a very good man. Thank you, sir. Chief, I came because you had promised my father that after I finished my education, you would help me get a position here. I have graduated now. I have done my NISC, and I was hoping. She trailed off, watching his face. The smile remained, but something behind it had hardened. My dear, I remember that conversation, and I meant it at the time, but you see how things are now? The government has frozen employment. There is no recruitment happening anywhere. Even my own children are at home with their certificates. But, sir, you said I know what I said, but promises are not contracts, my dear. If there was a vacancy, I would fight for you. But there is nothing, absolutely nothing. He checked his expensive watch. I have another meeting now, but keep trying. Something will come up, and if I hear of anything, I will let you know. He was gone before she could respond, his agbada flowing behind him like the wings of a bird taking flight. Gozi had stood there in the corridor, feeling the stares of the secretary and the other office workers, feeling her face burn with shame and humiliation and a rage so pure it frightened her. She had walked home that day in a daze, barely noticing the streets she had known since childhood. The world had taken on a gray quality, as if someone had drained all the color from it. The promises that had sustained her through years of study, through her father's death, through the struggle of her final exams, they were all dust. Now, all worthless. Mama Idu's rejection had been the most casual, the most dismissive. Gozi had found her in her provisions store, presiding over her empire of canned goods and bagged rice like a queen on her throne. Mama Idu, good afternoon. I came to see you about, Gozi. Patrick's daughter. How are you, my dear? How is your mother? The same questions, the same false warmth. Gozi was beginning to see a pattern. Mama is managing, thank you. Mama Idu, you remember at my father's funeral, you said if I ever needed anything, I should come to you. Well, I need help finding a job, any job at all. I have my degree, I have my certificate, I am willing to work hard. Mama Idu's face had undergone the same transformation Gozi had seen on Chief Ibuka's recognition, wariness, practiced sympathy. My dear, times are hard. You know how the economy is. Even this, my business, I am struggling to keep it afloat. If I had a position, I would give it to you in a heartbeat. But I don't. I am sorry. It doesn't have to be in your store, Mama. Just if you know anyone, any contact, any, I will keep my ears open. That is the best I can do. Now excuse me, I have customers waiting. Gozi had left the store feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. She had walked through the market, past the stalls selling everything from second-hand shoes to fresh vegetables, past the women calling out to customers, past the children running between the legs of adults, and she had felt utterly, completely alone. Her father had been her connection to the world. He had been the bridge between her dreams and reality. With him gone, the bridge had collapsed, and she was stranded on the wrong side of a chasm she could not cross. That night she had sat with her mother in their small parlor, the television playing some Nollywood drama that neither of them was watching. The cough that had been troubling her mother seemed worse, deeper, more persistent. Mama, have you been taking your medicine regularly? Her mother had waved a dismissive hand. The medicine is finished. I will get more when I can. When you can? Mama, you need that medicine, the doctor said. The doctor said many things. The doctor also said we should pay for tests we cannot afford and buy drugs that cost more than our monthly feeding. The doctor does not know that since your father died, his pension has not been released, and what little we had is almost gone." Gozi had felt the familiar weight settle on her chest. "How much is left?" Her mother had hesitated, then named a figure so small that Gozi had to ask her to repeat it. When she did, the weight on Gozi's chest became almost unbearable. "Mama, that cannot last us 2 weeks." "I know, but God will provide. He always does." Gozi had wanted to scream. She had wanted to shake her mother and shout that God helps those who help themselves, that they couldn't just sit there and wait for miracles, that something had to be done. But she had looked at her mother's face, at the lines of grief and illness etched into it, at the weariness in her eyes, and she had swallowed her words. "Don't worry, Mama," she had said instead. "I will find something. I will take care of us." Her mother had smiled, a weak, tired smile. "I know you will, my daughter. Your father always said you were special. He said you would do great things." The words had felt like a burden rather than a comfort. Great things. How could she do great things when she couldn't even find a small job? How could she live up to her father's belief in her when the world seemed determined to prove him wrong? The next morning she had started her search in earnest. She had bought newspapers, circled advertisements, typed and printed dozens of CVs at a cyber that charged by the page. She had walked from office to office, company to company, dropping off her applications, smiling at receptionists, shaking hands with hiring managers, saying the same words over and over. "My name is Gozi Okafor. I have a degree in business administration from the University of Benin. I am hardworking, dedicated, and ready to learn." And over she had heard the same responses. "We will call you. There are no vacancies at this time. Come back next month. Do you know anyone inside? We need someone with experience." How could she have experience when no one would give her a chance? How could she know anyone when the only person she knew who could help was dead? The weeks turned into months. The months turned into nearly a year. And still Gozi searched, and still the doors remained closed. It was during this time that she had found the job with Mama Kelechi. It wasn't what she wanted, standing in a hot, crowded boutique for 12 hours a day, earning barely enough to buy her mother's medication and put food on the table. But it was something. It was income. It was survival. Mama Kelechi was a hard woman with a sharp tongue and no patience for what she called educated people who think they are too good for market work. She paid Gozi 300 naira a day, sometimes less if sales were slow, and she worked her from dawn until the last customer left. There were no breaks, no benefits, no hope of advancement. But Gozi took it. She had no choice. The irony was not lost on her. She, with her university degree, her second-class upper, her dreams of air-conditioned offices and management positions, spent her days folding fabric and enduring the insults of a woman who could barely write her name. She had become invisible, just another market girl, just another struggling graduate, just another statistic in a country that produced thousands of degree holders every year with nowhere to go. But she did not complain, not to her mother, who had enough worries. Not to her friends, who had their own struggles, not to anyone. She woke up every morning, put on her market clothes, walked to the boutique, and did what she had to do. And at night, when she came home exhausted, her feet aching and her spirit weary, she would sit with her mother, count the day's earnings, and plan for the next day. It was during one of these nights, as she was massaging her mother's back to help her breathe, that Adana had spoken the words that would stay with Gozi forever. "You know, my daughter, your father used to say that life is like a game of drafts. Sometimes you are moving forward, sometimes you are jumping backward, but in the end, if you play well, you will reach the other side. We are in the backward part now, but the other side is coming. I feel it." Gozi had wanted to believe her. She had wanted to hold on to that hope, to let it carry her through the darkness. But as she lay in her bed that night, listening to her mother's labored breathing through the thin walls, she had wondered how much longer they could survive the backward part. How much longer before the other side came? How much longer before she could finally prove that her father's belief in her had not been misplaced? She did not have the answers. All she had was the morning and the market and the endless grinding routine of survival. But somewhere deep in the recesses of her heart, the small voice still whispered, "Not yet, not forever. Something will change." She held on to it. She had to. What else was there? The market grind the first time Gozi saw Mama Kelechi. The woman was screaming at a young girl who could not have been more than 14. Useless girl. Good for nothing. Is this how you fold expensive fabric? You want to ruin my business? If your mother brought you here to learn, then learn well or pack your load and go back to the village. The girl, whose name Gozi would later learn was Adiz, stood with her head bowed, tears streaming down her cheeks, her small hands trembling as she clutched the offending piece of ankara. She did not speak, did not defend herself, did not even wipe her eyes. She simply stood there and absorbed the abuse like a sponge absorbing water. Gozi had witnessed this scene from just outside the boutique, her application letter clutched in her sweating palm. She had heard from a neighbor that Mama Kelechi was looking for a shop assistant, and desperation had driven her to this crowded corner of the main market. But watching the woman's tirade, she had almost turned and walked away, almost. But then she thought of her mother's medicine, of the empty pot in the kitchen, of the unpaid debts piling up like harmattan leaves. She thought of the promises that had turned to dust, the connections that had vanished, the degree that had become a mockery, and she had stepped forward. Good morning, Ma. My name is Gozi Okafor. I heard you are looking for an assistant. Mama Kelechi had turned to her with the sharp, assessing gaze of a hawk spotting potential prey. She was a large woman, not fat but solid, with arms that looked capable of lifting a bag of rice without breaking a sweat. Her face was round and dark, dominated by sharp eyes that missed nothing and a mouth that seemed permanently set. In a scowl, she wore a vibrant blue wrapper and a white blouse with a matching jewel tied expertly around her head, and gold jewelry glinted at her ears and neck. Despite her harsh demeanor, there was something undeniably successful about her, something that spoke of years of surviving and thriving in the unforgiving world of the market. Assistant? Mama Kelechi had repeated, drawing the word out as if tasting it. You are educated, Abby? I can see it in the way you stand, the way you talk. What did you study in school? Business administration, Ma, University of Benin. The woman had laughed then, a harsh, barking sound that held no humor. University of Benin, business administration. And you want to work in my small boutique? You will not last 1 week. These educated ones, they come here with their big grammar and their soft hands, and the first time a customer insults them, they run away crying. I have seen it before. I am not like that, Ma. I need work. I will do whatever you ask. Mama Kelechi had studied her for a long moment, and Gozi had held her gaze, refusing to look away. Finally, the woman had grunted. 300 naira per day. You will be here by 7 every morning, including Saturdays. You will leave when I say you can leave, not before. You will fold fabrics, arrange the shop, serve customers, and do whatever else I tell you to do. If you are sick, come anyway. If you are tired, come anyway. If you have problems at home, leave them at home. This is business. In business, there are no excuses. You understand? Gozi had understood. She had understood that she was being offered a pittance for back-breaking work, that she was being given no guarantees, no benefits, no hope of advancement, but she had also understood that she had no other options. I understand, Ma. Thank you for the opportunity. And so it began. The boutique occupied a prime location in the market, sandwiched between a provision store and a phone-charging kiosk. It was a narrow space, perhaps 4 meters wide and 6 meters deep, but Mama Kelechi had packed it with as much fabric as physically possible. Bolts of ankara in every imaginable color and pattern lined the walls. From floor to ceiling, stacked on wooden shelves that groaned under the weight, more fabrics hung from hooks on the ceiling, creating a colorful canopy that swayed gently whenever the rickety ceiling fan was turned on. In the center of the shop stood a large wooden table, scarred and worn from years of use, where fabrics were laid out for customers to examine. The smell of the shop was distinctive, a mixture of new cloth, dust, the faint perfume of the Indian hemp rope used to tie the bolts, and the ever-present scent of the market itself. Frying plantains, diesel fumes, and the earthy odor of thousands of people going about their daily business. Gozi's day began at 4:30 a.m. She would wake in the darkness, her body already aching from the previous day's labor, and creep quietly around the room so as not to disturb her mother. A quick wash with a bucket of cold water, a prayer whispered under her breath, and she was out the door by 5:15, walking through the still sleeping streets toward the bus stop. The first bus of the day was always crowded with people like her market women heading to their stalls, laborers going to construction sites, cleaners on their way to offices in the city center. They sat in weary silence, packed together like sardines, each lost in their own thoughts, their own struggles, their own small hopes for the day ahead. By 6:45, Gozi would arrive at the market. It was already coming alive around her, shop owners unlocking their metal shutters, apprentices sweeping the walkways, early customers haggling over prices for vegetables and meat. The air was thick with the sounds of commerce, the clinking of coins, the calling out of prices, the blare of religious music from a nearby seedy stall. Her first task was to sweep the boutique, removing the dust and dirt that had accumulated overnight. Then she would fetch water from the public tap 2 streets away, carrying the heavy bucket back on her head the way she had learned as a child in the village. She would dust every bolt of fabric, rearrange any that had been disturbed the previous day, and ensure that the shop looked presentable before Mama Kelechi arrived at 8 o'clock. By 7:30, Adiz would arrive. The girl lived with Mama Kelechi as a sort of unpaid apprentice or domestic servant, a common arrangement in the market where poor families sent their daughters to learn trade in exchange for room and board. Adiz was from a village deep in the interior, sent to the city by parents who could not afford to feed her, let alone send her to school. She was quiet, almost silent, and moved through her tasks with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned that drawing attention to oneself was dangerous. Gozi tried to be kind to her. In the brief moments when Mama Kelechi was not watching, she would share her food with the girl or teach her to read simple words from the newspaper used to wrap purchases. Adiz never said much in return, but sometimes when Gozi spoke to her, a small light would flicker in her eyes, a glimpse of the child she might have been in another life. The customers began arriving by 9 o'clock. Market women looking for fabrics to sew into clothes for their children's weddings. Young ladies searching for the perfect pattern for their engagement ceremonies. Men buying gifts for their wives or mothers. Fashion designers from the surrounding neighborhoods purchasing in bulk for their clients. Each customer brought their own demands, their own attitudes, their own unique way of making Gozi's job more difficult. Show me that blue one. No, not that blue, the other blue. The one with the smaller pattern. No, that is too small. Do you have something in between? How much is this? 5,000? Are you mad? I can get this same fabric for 3,000 at the next shop. Call your madam. I don't want to deal with a small girl like you. Where is the owner of this shop? You are folding it wrong. Don't you know that expensive fabric must be folded a certain way? Were you not taught properly? Gozi learned to smile through it all. She learned to nod politely at insults, to maintain her composure when customers accused her of cheating them, to keep her voice calm and pleasant even when every fiber of her being wanted to scream. She learned that in the market the customer was always right, even when they were wrong, even when they were rude, even when they made her want to quit on the spot. Mama Kelechi, for her part, watched everything from her perch on a high stool in the corner of the shop. She rarely helped with customers, preferring to observe, to critique, to pounce on the smallest mistake. Gozi, that customer has been waiting for 5 minutes. Are your legs broken? Gozi, you are wrapping that fabric too loosely. You want it to fall open on her way home? Then she will come back and say we sold her damaged goods? Gozi, stop smiling so much. This is business, not a beauty pageant. You think smiling will make them pay more? The days were long. There were no breaks, no designated lunch hour. Gozi ate when she could, usually a small meal of gari and groundnut she had brought from home, eaten quickly in a corner of the shop while keeping one eye on the entrance. She drank water sparingly because using the public toilet meant leaving the shop unattended, and Mama Kelechi did not approve of wasting time. By evening, her feet would be swollen, her back aching, her head throbbing from the constant noise and pressure. But the day was not over until Mama Kelechi said it was over, which was usually well after the sun had set and most other shops had closed. One more customer, Mama Kelechi would say, even as Gozi was gathering her things. To leave, just one more. She is on her way. She promised to come today. Sometimes the customer came, sometimes she didn't. Either way, Gozi stayed. The first time Gozi considered quitting was 2 weeks into the job. A customer, a large woman with the imperious manner of someone accustomed to being obeyed, had spent an hour examining fabrics, rejecting each one for increasingly trivial reasons. Gozi had pulled down bolt after bolt, climbing the rickety ladder to reach the highest shelves, spreading each fabric on the table for inspection, folding it carefully when rejected. Her arms ached, her head spun, and she was desperately hungry. Finally, the woman had selected 3 fabrics and demanded a discount. Gozi, following Mama Kelechi's strict instructions, had quoted the fixed price. Fixed price? In this market? Are you joking? The woman's voice had risen to a screech. I have been buying here for 20 years. I know your madam. She would never refuse me a discount. Call her here. Mama Kelechi had descended from her stool like a queen entering a battlefield. The negotiation that followed was fierce, a verbal duel that drew spectators from neighboring shops. In the end, a compromise was reached, a small discount, but not as much as the customer wanted. The woman paid, grumbling, and swept out of the shop with her purchases. As soon as she was gone, Mama Kelechi had turned on Gozi. You almost lost me that sale. Standing there like a fool, telling her fixed price, fixed price. Don't you know that some customers need to feel like they are winning? That you have to give them something even if it is nothing? Use your brain, stupid girl. University graduate indeed. Gozi had stood there, humiliated, fighting back tears. The other shop workers outside had heard everything. Adiz had looked away, her face tight with shared shame. And in that moment, Gozi had wanted nothing more than to walk out, to never come back, to find some other way, any other way. But she thought of her mother, of the medication that cost 700 naira for a week's supply, of the rent that was due at the end of the month, of the debts that grew larger with each passing day, and she had swallowed her pride, bowed her head, and said, I am sorry, Ma. It will not happen again. Mama Kelechi had grunted, apparently satisfied, and returned to her stool. That night, walking home in the darkness, Gozi had wept. She wept for her father, for her dying mother, for herself. She wept for the dreams that seemed to be dying a slow death in that cramped, dusty shop. She wept until she had no tears left, and then she had washed her face at the public tap, straightened her clothes, and walked into the compound with a smile. How was work today? Her mother had asked, her voice weak from coughing. Fine, Mama, it was fine. I brought plantain. Let me fry it for you. She had learned to separate her life into compartments. In one compartment was the market with its noise and dust and humiliation. In another compartment was her mother, fragile and fading, needing care and love and protection from the harsh realities outside. In a third compartment was Gozi herself, the person she had been before, the person she still hoped to become. She moved between these compartments each day, never letting one bleed into the other, never letting her mother see the toll the market was taking on her. But at night, alone in her bed, the compartments would collapse, and she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she could keep this up. The incident with the thief happened 3 months into her employment. It was a busy Saturday, the market crowded with shoppers taking advantage of the weekend. Gozi was serving 3 customers simultaneously, her brain racing to keep track of prices and measurements and change. A young man in a dirty yellow t-shirt had been hovering at the edge of the shop for some time, pretending to examine fabrics, but never asking for assistance. Gozi had noticed him but was too busy to pay him much attention. Then, in a moment of chaos, when 2 customers were arguing over the same fabric, the man moved. His hand shot out, grabbing a small bolt of expensive lace from a low shelf, and he was gone, disappearing into the crowd before Gozi could even open her mouth to shout. Mama Kelechi had seen it too. She was off her stool in an instant. Moving with surprising speed for a woman her size, pushing through the crowd and screaming at the top of her lungs, "Thief! Thief! Somebody catch that thief!" But the man was fast, and the market was crowded, and by the time anyone thought to respond, he had vanished into the maze of stalls and alleys. Mama Kelechi returned to the shop 30 minutes later, sweating and furious. She did not scream at Gozi immediately. Instead, she sat on her stool, breathing heavily, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Gozi stood frozen, waiting for the explosion. It came, but not in the form she expected. That lace, Mama Kelechi said quietly, cost me 18,000 naira, 18,000. Do you know how many meters I have to sell to make that back? How many hours I have to sit in this shop? I am sorry, Ma. I did not see. Of course you did not see. You were too busy serving customers. That is what thieves count on. They watch, they wait, they strike when you are distracted. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, softer. But it is not your fault. It is the world we live in. These boys, they are hungry too, hungry and desperate, just like you. Gozi had looked at her boss with new eyes in that moment. Beneath the harsh exterior, beneath the constant criticism and the sharp tongue, there was something else. A recognition, a shared understanding of what it meant to struggle, to fight, to survive. You will work an extra hour each day until that money is repaid, Mama Kelechi continued. Not because I blame you, but because in this business we share the losses. That is how it works. You understand? Gozi understood, and strangely she did not resent it. It was unfair, yes. She had not stolen the fabric. She had been doing her job, serving customers, trying her best. But the world was unfair, and Mama Kelechi was simply teaching her a lesson that the world would teach her anyway, that sometimes you paid for things that were not your fault simply because you were there. For the next 3 weeks, Gozi worked an extra hour each day, leaving the market well after dark, walking home through streets that grew more dangerous with each passing night. But she did not complain. She did not resent. She simply did what she had to do and waited for the debt to be paid. The friendship with Chin was what kept her sane during those months. Chin had been her friend since primary school, one of those rare people who remained constant through all of life's changes. They had attended different secondary schools, different universities, but whenever they came home, they picked up right where they left off, as if no time had passed at all. Chin was different from Gozi in almost every way. Where Gozi was quiet and reserved, Chin was loud and outgoing. Where Gozi planned and worried, Chin laughed and trusted. Where Gozi saw obstacles, Chin saw opportunities. But somehow their differences complemented each other, and their friendship had weathered storms that would have broken lesser bonds. Chin worked at a small tailoring shop in another part of the market, earning even less than Gozi, but complaining about it with such good humor that it almost seemed like a privilege. She would appear at the boutique during slow moments, leaning against the doorframe and chattering about everything and nothing, the latest Nollywood gossip, the antics of her many siblings, the ridiculousness of the boys who tried to court her. Gozi, you won't believe what that boy Chidi did today? He came to the shop with a roasted plantain. Can you imagine? Roasted plantain. As if I am some goat that will be won over with food? I told him, Chidi, if you want to impress me, bring money, not plantain. Gozi would laugh, genuinely laugh, something she did with no one else. With Chin, she could forget for a few precious minutes the weight of her responsibilities. She could be 19 years old, struggling and hopeful, instead of a 22-year-old carrying the weight of her family's survival. You are too hard on them, Gozi would say. At least he is trying. Trying is not enough. I am a queen. I deserve a king, not a boy with roasted plantain. Chin would flip her hair dramatically, and they would both dissolve into giggles. But Chin also saw beyond the laughter. She saw the shadows under Gozi's eyes, the way her clothes hung looser on her frame, the desperation that flickered in her gaze when she thought no one was watching. Gozi, when was the last time you ate? Properly? She asked one afternoon, catching Gozi off guard. I eat every day. Gari and salt is not eating. You are fading away, my friend. Soon you will be thin as a broomstick, and then who will carry all your troubles? Gozi had no answer. She could not explain that every naira she earned went to her mother's medication, to the debts, to the small necessities that kept them alive. There was nothing left for proper meals, for new clothes, for any of the small pleasures that made life worth living. Chin had looked at her for a long moment, then reached into her pocket and pressed something into Gozi's hand. It was a 500 naira note. What is this? It is for you, for food, real food, not Gari. I cannot take this, Chin. You earn even less than I do, and I have 5 healthy siblings and 2 parents who will never let me starve. You have only your mother, and she is sick. Take it, and if you try to give it back, I will scream and tell everyone in the market that you stole my boyfriend. Gozi had taken the money, too moved to speak. That night she bought a small piece of fish to go with their dinner, and her mother had smiled, a real smile, the first in weeks. "It is like your father used to say," her mother had murmured, chewing slowly. "A true friend is worth more than gold." Gozi had thought of Chin's laughing face, of the 500 naira pressed into her hand, of the years of friendship that had led to this moment, and she had silently thanked God for sending her at least one angel in this difficult world. The months passed in a blur of routine. Gozi learned to read Mama Kelechi's moods, to anticipate what she wanted before she asked, to navigate the treacherous waters of market politics. She learned which customers were serious and which were just browsing, which fabrics were selling and which were gathering dust, which neighboring shopkeepers could be trusted and which would steal your customers the moment your back was turned. She learned to fold fabric with military precision, to calculate prices in her head faster than any calculator, to smile through insults and maintain her dignity in the face of humiliation. She learned that survival was not about pride or principles, but about endurance, about showing up day after day, even when every fiber of your being wanted to give up. Her mother's condition worsened. The cough grew deeper, more persistent. There were good days when she could sit up and talk, and bad days when she could barely lift her head from the pillow. The medication helped, but only temporarily. The doctor at the free clinic had mentioned more expensive treatments, better hospitals, specialists who might actually be able to diagnose and treat whatever was eating away at her lungs. But those things cost money. Money Gozi did not have. Money she could not earn folding fabrics for 300 naira a day. Some nights, lying awake in the darkness, Gozi would calculate 300 naira per day, 6 days a week, was 1,800 naira. In a month, if she worked every day and Mama Kelechi did not deduct anything for damages or theft, she earned approximately 7,200 naira. Her mother's medication cost 3,000 naira per week. The math was simple, brutal, and inescapable. They were slowly dying. Her mother from illness, Gozi from exhaustion and despair, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. It was on one of these nights, when despair had wrapped itself around her like a blanket, that Gozi made a decision. She would not give up. She could not give up. Her father had believed in her, had sacrificed for her, had died before he could see her succeed. She owed it to him to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep believing that something would change. She did not know what that change would be or when it would come, but she held on to the belief with the desperation of a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood. It was all she had. Tomorrow she would wake at 4:30. She would go to the market. She would fold fabrics and serve customers and endure Mama Kelechi's sharp tongue. She would come home exhausted and count her meager earnings and plan for the next day. And somewhere in the vast, chaotic city, the change she needed was waiting. She had to believe that. What else was there? The news that changed everything the Thursday evening started like any other. Gozi had been on her feet since 7 that morning, and by 5 in the evening her body was screaming for rest. The market was beginning to wind down, shopkeepers pulling down their shutters, apprentices sweeping the walkways, the last few customers hurrying to complete their purchases before darkness fell. Mama Kelechi had gone to the market union meeting, leaving Gozi in charge of closing the shop, a rare sign of trust that Gozi did not take lightly. She was carefully folding a stack of ankara that a customer had rummaged through when she heard the familiar sound of Chin's voice cutting through the evening air. "Gozi, Gozi, thank God I caught you." Gozi looked up to see her friend racing toward the shop, weaving through the thinning crowd with the urgency of someone carrying news of life or death. Chin's face was flushed, her eyes wide with excitement, and she was waving a small envelope above her head like a victory flag. "Wedding happen?" Gozi asked, stepping out of the shop. "Is somebody dying?" "Somebody is living." Chin panted, coming to a stop in front of her. She bent over, hands on her knees, struggling to catch her breath. Give me 1 minute. I ran all the way from the other side of the market." Gozi waited, her curiosity piqued. Chin was dramatic by nature, but this was something else. Whatever news she carried had her genuinely agitated. Finally, Chin straightened up, still breathing hard but grinning from ear to ear. "You know my brother Chuka, the one who works as a cleaner somewhere?" "Not just somewhere. Amarapet, the big oil company." Chin grabbed Gozi's arms, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so slight. Gozi, they are hiring. Real jobs, not cleaner jobs, not casual jobs, office jobs for graduates. The words took a moment to register. When they did, Gozi felt her heart give a strange lurch, a mixture of hope and disbelief that made her slightly dizzy. Amerapet? The oil company? Hiring. See for yourself. Chin thrust the envelope into Gozi's hands. Chuka clipped it from the newspaper this morning and brought it to me. He said I should show you immediately. He knows how you have been suffering in this market. Gozi's hands trembled as she pulled out the newspaper clipping. It was a small advertisement, no more than a few inches square, but the words seemed to leap off the page. Amerapet Exploration Limited vacancy for junior administrative staff. Amerapet Exploration, a leading indigenous oil and gas company, invites applications from suitably qualified candidates for the position of junior administrative staff. Requirements: bachelor's degree in any discipline, second class upper, preferred 0 to 2 years work experience, excellent communication and computer skills. Ability to work under pressure, remuneration. Competitive, negotiable at interview. Interested candidates should come for an interview at our Lagos office on Saturday, March 15th by 10 a.m. prompt. Venue, Amerapet Plaza, 24 Marine Road, Victoria Island. No phone calls, please. Only shortlisted candidates will be contacted. Gozi read the advertisement 3 times, her eyes moving over each word as if she could extract more meaning from them through sheer concentration. Competitive remuneration, Victoria Island, oil and gas. These were words from another world, a world she had only glimpsed in movies and magazines, a world of air conditioning and catered lunches and salaries that could change everything. Chin, she whispered, looking up at her friend, this is, I know. Chin squealed, grabbing her in a hug. This is your chance. The big break we have been praying for. But look at the requirements. Second class upper preferred. I have that, but experience. Computer skills. I have not touched a computer since school, and the venue is Lagos. How will I get to Lagos? The transport alone will cost Gozi. Chin shook her firmly. Stop finding problems. This is God answering our prayers, and you are sitting here calculating transport costs? We will find a way. We always find a way. Gozi looked at the advertisement again, and this time a different set of words caught her eye. The date, Saturday, March 15th. That was the day after tomorrow. Chin, the interview is on Saturday. Tomorrow is Friday. I have to travel to Lagos tomorrow night or very early Saturday morning. I don't have the money for transport. I don't have anything to wear. I don't even have a proper CV to submit. Then we have work to do, Chin said firmly. Close this shop. Let's go to your house. We will plan. But Mama Kelechi can wait. This is your future we are talking about. Close the shop. For a moment, Gozi hesitated. Mama Kelechi had trusted her to close up properly. If anything went wrong, if any fabric was stolen or damaged, the consequences would be severe. But as she looked at Chin's determined face, at the newspaper clipping, in her hand she made a decision. She closed the shop. They walked to Gozi's compound in the gathering dusk, their voices a constant stream of planning and dreaming. Chin, as always, was the engine of optimism, generating ideas at a rate that Gozi could barely keep up with. For the transport, my brother Chuka can help. He just got paid, and he owes me money anyway. I will collect it and give you. It should be enough for a bus to Lagos and back. Chin, I cannot take money from Chuka. He works so hard for his pay, cleaning offices. He works for Amerapet. Don't you see the connection? He knows people there. He can tell you about the company, about what they look for in interviews. About Chin stopped abruptly, a thought clearly striking her. In fact, Chuka can get you information. He knows the cleaners who work in the offices, the ones who empty the waste bins and dust the desks. They see everything. They hear everything. They can tell you what kind of questions they ask in interviews. Gozi stared at her friend. You want me to get interview tips from cleaners? I want you to use every advantage God gives you. These big companies, they think cleaners are invisible, but cleaners see everything. They know which managers are strict and which are soft. They know what the interview panel cares about. This is not cheating, Gozi. This is being smart. By the time they reached Gozi's compound, a plan was beginning to take shape. Chin would get money from her brother. Gozi would borrow clothes from their neighbor, Mrs. Okonkwo, who had a daughter working in Lagos and owned several decent office dresses. They would find a cyber tomorrow morning to print a proper CV, and Chuka would gather whatever information he could about the interview process. As they sat on the concrete wall in the compound, going over the plan for the third time, Gozi's mother appeared in the doorway. She was wrapped in her usual wrapper, one hand gripping the doorframe, her face pale with the effort of standing. "What is all this noise about?" she asked, but there was a smile in her voice. "Chin, my daughter, you are disturbing the whole neighborhood. Mama." Chin jumped up and rushed to embrace her. "Mama, we have good news. Amarapet is hiring. Gozi is going for interview on Saturday." Adana's eyes widened. She looked from Chin to Gozi, and something flickered in her gaze, hope, fear, disbelief, all mixed together. "Amarapet? The oil company?" "Yes, Mama," Gozi said softly. "I am going to try." Her mother moved slowly, painfully, to sit beside them on the wall. For a long moment she said nothing, just looked at Gozi with an expression that made her daughter's heart ache. "Your father," Adana finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "always said you would do something great. He used to tell me, Adana, that girl has fire in her belly. She will not be held down by anything." She reached out and took Gozi's hand. "I have been praying, my daughter. Every night I pray to God to open a door for you. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the answer." "Don't worry, Mama," Chin said confidently. "Gozi will pass that interview. She will get the job, and then we will all be eating rice and chicken every Sunday." They laughed, but Gozi could see the tears glistening in her mother's eyes. She squeezed her mother's hand and said nothing. The hope in the air was too fragile, too precious, to be weighed down by words. Friday morning came with a mixture of excitement and terror. Gozi woke at her usual 4:30, but instead of preparing for the market, she wrote a quick note for Mama Kelechi explaining that she was sick and would not be coming in. It was the first time she had ever lied to her boss, and her hand trembled as she wrote. But this was too important. This was her one chance. By 7 o'clock, she and Chin were at a cyber near the market. The place was small and hot, crowded with young people checking emails, printing documents, and chatting on social media. The computers were old, the keyboards sticky with years of use, but they worked. Gozi sat in front of one of the machines, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. It had been over a year since she had last used a computer, and she felt clumsy, out of practice. But slowly, painstakingly, she typed out her CV name, Gozi Adana Okafor. Date of birth, April 12, 1998. Education, B.Sc, Business Administration, second class upper, University of Benin NISC. Completed 2023, Lagos State. Skills, Microsoft Word Basic, Excel Basic, Communication, Customer Service. The skills section felt pathetic. Basic Microsoft Word. Was that really all she had to offer after 5 years of university? But she had no choice. There was no point lying. If they tested her, she would fail. Chin leaned over her shoulder, reading as she typed. Add something about being hardworking and honest and able to work under pressure. They liked that. Gozi added the lines, though they felt hollow. Everyone claimed to be hardworking. Everyone said they could work under pressure. What made her different? By 9 o'clock, the CV was printed, 10 copies at 50 naira each, using up almost all of the money Chin had given her. Gozi held the papers in her hand, looking at her name printed in elegant font, and felt a flicker of something she had not felt in months. Pride, small and fragile, but real. Next was the clothing. Mrs. Okonkwo lived 3 compounds away, a widow whose only daughter, Eber, worked as a secretary in Lagos. She was a kind woman, always ready to help those in need, and when Gozi explained the situation, she opened her doors without hesitation. Eber left many clothes here when she traveled, Mrs. Okonkwo said, leading them to a small room at the back of her house. She said she would send for them, but you know how these young people are. Busy, busy, always busy. Take whatever you need. The room was crowded with boxes and bags, but Mrs. Okonkwo knew exactly where to look. She pulled out a garment bag and unzipped it to reveal a navy blue skirt, suit jacket, and matching skirt, professional and elegant, clearly expensive. This one Eber wore to her own interview. She said it brought her luck. You can borrow it. Gozi touched the fabric reverently. It was smooth and cool under her fingers, a world away from the rough cotton of her market clothes. She held it up against herself, and even in the dim light of the storage room, she could see the difference it made. She looked like someone who belonged in an office. She looked like someone who could work at Amarapet. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered. "Thank you so much. Just bring it back when you are done," Mrs. Okonkwo said, patting her cheek. "And bring good news too, eh? We are all praying for you." Chuka arrived at Gozi's compound that evening, straight from his shift at Amarapet. He was a quiet young man, not much older than Gozi, with the weary look of someone who had been working since childhood. His uniform was simple navy blue trousers and a matching shirt with the Amarapet logo stitched on the pocket, but he wore it with a dignity that commanded respect. "Gozi," he said, nodding as he sat down. "Chin told me everything. I came as soon as I finished work. Thank you, Chuka. Thank you for the advertisement, for everything." He waved away her thanks. "No time for that. Let me tell you what I know." For the next hour, Chuka shared everything he had learned in his months of cleaning the Amarapet offices. He knew which managers were strict and which were approachable. He knew that the interview panel usually consisted of 3 people: the HR manager, a departmental head, and an external consultant. He knew that they asked both technical questions and behavioral questions, that they valued confidence but not arrogance, that they were looking for people who could think on their feet. "The HR manager, Mrs. Eckenham," he said, lowering his voice, even though they were alone. "She is the one you need to impress. She is tough, very tough. She does not smile during interviews, but if you answer well, she respects you. The cleaners, we see how she treats people. If you are honest and straightforward, she will fight for you. If you lie, even one small lie, she will destroy you." Gozi listened intently, absorbing every word. This was information she could never have gotten anywhere else, insights that might make the difference between success and failure. "The other thing," Chuka continued, "is the company itself. Amarapet is owned by a family, the Amaras. The old man started it, but now his son, Emeka Amara, runs everything. He is young, maybe 35, but very sharp. He does not come to the office, often too busy with big deals, but when he comes, everyone straightens up, the cleaners. We have to make everything perfect when he is coming. Even the dust must be arranged properly." Gozi smiled at that. Even the dust must be arranged properly. That was the level of perfection she was aiming for. "One more thing," Chuka said. "The interview on Saturday? It is just the first round. If you pass, there will be a second interview, maybe even a third. So do not relax even if this one goes well. The battle is long." Gozi nodded, her mind already racing ahead. A second interview, a third. This was not just a job opportunity. It was a process, a gauntlet she would have to run. But she was ready. She had to be ready. After Chuka left, Gozi sat alone in the compound, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The navy blue suit hung on the line, swaying gently in the evening breeze. Her printed CV sat on the small table in her room, 10 copies ready for distribution. The money for transport was tucked safely in her bra, the only place she trusted to keep it secure. Everything was ready, everything was prepared. Tomorrow she would travel to Lagos. The day after, she would face the interview panel at Amarapet, and if God was willing, if her father was watching from heaven, if all the prayers and hopes and dreams of everyone who loved her could carry her through, she would succeed. She thought of her mother, sleeping fitfully in the next room, her breath rattling with every exhale. She thought of her father, buried in the village cemetery, his dreams for her buried with him. She thought of Chin, of Chuka, of Mrs. Okonkwo, of all the people who had rallied around her in the past 24 hours, believing in her when she had almost stopped believing in herself. "I will not let you down," she whispered into the darkness. "Papa, I will not let you down." The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to her promise, and somewhere in the vast, chaotic city, the doors of Amarapet waited, ready to open or close based on her performance. Gozi went inside, lay down on her bed, and for the first time in months, she slept without nightmares. The bus to Lagos left at a.m. on Saturday. Morning. Gozi had woken at 3:30, unable to sleep any longer. She had bathed carefully, using the last of the good soap, and dressed in the navy blue suit. It fit her almost perfectly, as if it had been made for her, and when she looked in the cracked mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back at her was not the market girl, not the struggling graduate, not the daughter of a dead man. She was a professional. She was a contender. She was someone who deserved to walk into Amarapet and ask for a job. Her mother had woken too, despite Gozi's attempts to be quiet. She sat on the edge of her bed, watching Gozi prepare, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You look like your father," she said softly. "When he was young, before we married, he used to dress like that for his own interviews. So proud, so hopeful." Gozi knelt beside her mother and took her hands. "Mama, I will come back with good news. I promise. Just come back safely. The news can wait." Adana pressed something into Gozi's hand, a small plastic bag containing roasted plantain and ground nuts for the journey. "You cannot interview on an empty stomach." Gozi wanted to protest, to say that they could not afford to give away food, but the look in her mother's eyes stopped her. This was love, pure and simple, the only way her mother could contribute to this dream. She accepted the gift and tucked it into her bag. "Pray for me, Mama, every step of the way. Now go, your bus will not wait." The walk to the motor park was quiet, the streets empty except for a few early risers and the ever-present stray dogs. Gozi's heart pounded with each step, a mixture of fear and excitement that made her feel slightly nauseous. She clutched her bag tightly, her CVs protected in a plastic folder, the transport money still safe in her. Brah! The bus was an old Toyota Hiace packed with passengers and their goods. Gozi squeezed into a seat near the window, her suit carefully arranged to avoid wrinkles. As the bus lurched into motion, she watched her town disappear behind her, the familiar streets, the market where she had suffered, the compound where her mother lay waiting. Lagos was ahead. Opportunity was ahead. Her future was ahead. She closed her eyes and began to pray. The journey took for hours. Lagos greeted her with its usual chaos, honking horns, hawkers pressing goods through bus windows, the thick haze of exhaust fumes that hung over everything like a blanket. Gozi had visited Lagos before during her NISC, but she had forgotten how overwhelming it could be, the sheer scale of it, the endless movement, the sense that millions of lives were being lived simultaneously in this sprawling, impossible city. She found her way to Victoria Island by asking directions, taking 2 different buses and walking for 20 minutes. By the time she reached Marine Road, her feet were aching and her suit was damp with sweat, but she was there. Amarapet Plaza stood before her, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to reach for the sky. It was easily the tallest building on the street, its facade reflecting the morning sun in 1,000 brilliant points of light. Gozi stood at the gate, staring up at it, and felt very, very small. Other candidates were already gathering at the entrance, young men and women in their best clothes, clutching folders and briefcases, their faces a mixture of confidence and anxiety. They looked like Gozi felt, hopeful, terrified, desperate for this chance. She joined them, finding a spot near the back of the group where she could observe without being observed. She watched as they checked their phones, reviewed their documents, practiced their smiles in the reflective glass of the building. She listened to their conversations, picking up fragments of information about where they had studied, what they had done, who they knew. A girl beside her, pretty and polished in a bright yellow dress, smiled in her direction. "First time?" Gozi nodded. "Me too. I am so nervous. I think I will vomit." The girl laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "My mother made me drink Agbo this morning, said it would calm my nerves. Now I just need to pee." Despite herself, Gozi smiled. "I am sure you will be fine. You too. We will all be fine." The girl glanced at her watch. 10 minutes. "To go. Let's pray." They prayed, each in their own way, as the glass doors of Amarapet slid open and a security guard stepped out with a clipboard. "All candidates for the administrative position." He called out, "Follow me, please. The interview will begin shortly." Gozi took a deep breath, clutched her folder to her chest, and stepped forward. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for, preparation and prayer. The waiting room of Amarapet Plaza was nothing like Gozi had ever seen. It was vast and airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Lagos skyline. The floor was polished marble, so clean that Gozi could see her reflection in it. Leather chairs were arranged in neat rows, and a large flat-screen television mounted on the wall displayed the company's logo rotating slowly against a blue background. The air was cool, almost cold, a sharp contrast to the heat outside. Gozi sat carefully, afraid to wrinkle her borrowed suit, afraid to touch anything, afraid to exist too loudly in this space that seemed designed for people much more important than her. Around her, the other candidates sat in various states of tension, some whispering to themselves, some reviewing documents, some staring blankly at the walls. The girl in the yellow dress, whose name Gozi had learned was Funmi, sat beside her, nervously twisting a strand of her hair. "How many people do you think are here?" Funmi whispered, glancing around the room. Gozi had already counted 47, including themselves. 47 candidates for what the security guard had said was probably 5 or 6 positions. "Too many," Gozi whispered back. A door at the far end of the room opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall and severe-looking, dressed in a black power suit with heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her face was expressionless, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that seemed to pull her features taut. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying across the room without effort. "I am Mrs. Eckenham, the Human Resources Manager. You will be called in groups of 3 for the first round of interviews. When your name is called, please line up at this door. Do not bring bags or phones into the interview room. Do not speak to other candidates. Once you have been called, is that clear?" A murmur of assent ran through the room. Mrs. Eckenham's eyes swept over them, and for a moment her gaze paused on Gozi. It was just a flicker, barely a second, but Gozi felt it like a physical touch. She remembered what Chuka had said. She is the one you need to impress. She does not smile, but if you answer well, she respects you. Mrs. Eckenham returned to the interview room, and the waiting began. The first hour was the hardest. Names were called in random order, and each time the door opened, Gozi's heart leaped into her throat. But her name was not among the first group, nor the second, nor the third. She watched as candidates filed in, some emerging 20 minutes later with faces that revealed nothing, others coming out quickly, their expressions betraying their failure. Funmi was called in the fourth group. She squeezed Gozi's hand before she left. "Pray for me, I will." 25 minutes later, Funmi emerged. Her face was carefully neutral, but as she passed Gozi, she gave a tiny nod and a quick smile. It was not exuberance, not victory, but it was something. Hope. By noon, half the candidates had been interviewed and released. Those who remained shifted restlessly in their seats, hunger and anxiety competing for dominance in their expressions. Gozi had eaten the roasted plantain her mother had given her, savoring each bite, reminding herself that this food was love, was prayer, was her mother's presence in this cold, impersonal room. At 12:30, her name was called. "Gozi Okafor, Group 9, please line up at the door." Gozi stood, her legs suddenly unsteady. She smoothed her skirt, clutched her folder, and walked toward the door with what she hoped was confidence. 2 other candidates joined her, a young man in an ill-fitting suit who kept clearing his throat nervously, and a woman who looked to be in her 30s, her expression cool and professional. The door opened, and they were led into a small anteroom where a secretary collected their phones and bags. Then another door, and they were in the interview room. It was smaller than Gozi had expected. A long table dominated the space, with 3 people seated on the far side. Mrs. Eckenham was in the middle, as Chuka had predicted. To her right sat a distinguished-looking man with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. To her left was a younger woman, perhaps in her early 40s, with a pleasant face and sharp, assessing eyes. "Please sit," Mrs. Eckenham said, gesturing to 3 chairs facing the table. Gozi sat, placing her folder on her lap, her hands folded on top of it to hide their trembling. The fluorescent lights above were bright, almost harsh, and she could feel a trickle of sweat making its way down her back despite the air conditioning. The gray-haired man spoke first. "Good afternoon. I am Mr. Adalik, head of administration. This is Mrs. Eckenham, whom you have met, and Dr. Obiageli, our external consultant. We will ask each of you some questions. Please answer honestly and to the best of your ability. We will begin with the candidate on the left." The interview proceeded in order. The nervous young man went first, stumbling over his answers, his voice cracking with tension. He was asked about his degree, his experience, why he wanted to work at Amarapet. His answers were rehearsed, robotic, and Gozi could see Mrs. Eckenham's expression growing more closed with each response. The professional woman went second. She was smooth, confident, her answers polished and professional. She had experience, she explained, working at a bank for 3 years before deciding to switch industries. She spoke of her achievements, her skills, her desire for growth. The panel listened attentively, and Gozi saw the younger woman, Dr. Obiageli, nodding approvingly. Then it was Gozi's turn. Miss Okafor, Mrs. Eckenham said, consulting a sheet of paper that Gozi assumed was her CV, University of Benin Business Administration, second class upper, no work experience listed. Tell us what you have been doing since graduation. Gozi took a breath. This was the moment. She could lie, could invent some internship or volunteer. Work that would sound impressive. But she remembered Chuka's warning, if you lie, even one small lie, she will destroy you. I have been working, Ma, Gozi said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Not in an office, in a market, at a boutique selling fabrics. She saw surprise flicker across Dr. Obiageli's face. The nervous young man beside her shifted in his seat, perhaps embarrassed for her, but Gozi continued. I took that job because my mother is sick and we needed money for her medication. It is not the job I wanted, not the job I prepared for in university, but it taught me things. It taught me to work long hours without complaining. It taught me to deal with difficult customers, to negotiate, to manage inventory, to be responsible for valuable goods. It taught me that every job has dignity and that hard work is hard work, whether you are in an office or a market. She paused, looking at each of the panel members in turn. I am not ashamed of that job. I am proud of it, because it kept my mother alive, and it kept me going, waiting for an opportunity like this one. Silence filled the room. Gozi could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on her. Then Mr. Adalik spoke. Tell us about a difficult customer you had to handle. How did you manage the situation? Gozi smiled slightly. This at least she knew. For the next 10 minutes, she told them stories from the market, the woman who had argued for an hour over a discount, the man who had accused her of damaging fabric he had damaged himself, the day she had to mediate between 2 customers fighting over the last piece of a popular design. She told them how she had learned to stay calm, to listen, to find compromises that satisfied everyone. She told them about the thief who had stolen the expensive lace and how she had worked extra hours to pay for it, even though it was not her fault. She told them about Mama Kelechi, difficult and demanding, who had taught her that in business there are no excuses. When she finished, Dr. Obiageli leaned forward. Miss Okafor, if we offered you this job, what would you bring to Amarapet that the other candidates cannot? Gozi thought for a moment. This was not a question she had prepared for. All her rehearsed answers about hard work and dedication seemed inadequate now. I would bring hunger, she said finally. Not the hunger for food, though I know that hunger too. I mean the hunger to succeed, the hunger that comes from having nothing and wanting something better. The other candidates, they have experience, they have connections, they have smooth resumes. I have hunger, I have the memory of my mother lying sick while I could not afford her medication. I have the memory of my father dying before he could see me graduate. I have the memory of every promise that was broken, every door that closed, every person who looked at my certificate and saw nothing. Her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. If you give me this job, I will not waste it. I will not take it for granted. I will work harder than anyone you have ever hired because I know what it is like to have nothing, and I never want to go back there. When she finished, the room was silent again. Mrs. Eckenham's face was unreadable, but something in her eyes had shifted. Mr. Adalik was studying Gozi with new interest. Dr. Obiageli was nodding slowly. Thank you, Miss Okafor, Mrs. Eckenham said. You will hear from us within the week. The interview was over. Gozi floated out of the building on legs that felt like rubber. She had no idea how she had done. Had she said too much? Had she been too emotional? Should she have stuck to professional answers instead of revealing so much of her personal struggle? But as she stood outside Amarapet Plaza, looking up at the gleaming tower, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Peace. Whatever happened now, she had done her best. She had been honest. She had been herself. The rest was in God's hands. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chin. How was it? Gozi typed back, I don't know, but I tried my best. The reply came immediately. That is all anyone can do. Come home safely. We are all praying. The journey back was a blur. Gozi sat on the bus, watching Lagos disappear behind her, replaying every moment of the interview in her mind. The look on Mrs. Ekenem's face when she mentioned the market, Mr. Adelik's thoughtful nod, Dr. Obiageli's final question. By the time she reached her town, it was evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Gozi walked through the familiar streets, past the market where she had suffered, toward the compound where her mother waited. Adana was sitting on the concrete wall when Gozi arrived, wrapped in her wrapper despite the evening chill. She stood as Gozi approached, her face searching. Well, Gozi sat beside her mother and took her hand. I don't know, Mama. I did my best. I told them the truth. I told them about the market, about you, about everything. Maybe it was too much. Maybe it was not enough. I don't know. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that reminded Gozi of the woman she had been before grief and illness claimed her. When I was young, Adana said softly, my mother used to tell me that the truth has a power of its own. You can dress it up, you can hide it, you can try to make it something it is not. But in the end, the truth is the truth, and people recognize it. You told them the truth, my daughter. That is never too much. That is always enough. They sat together in the gathering darkness, mother and daughter, holding hands, waiting for news that would change everything or change nothing. The waiting had begun. The week that followed was the longest of Gozi's life. She returned to the market on Monday, folding fabrics and serving customers as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart stopped. Every time she saw an unknown number, she had to fight the urge to run outside and answer immediately. Mama Kelechi noticed her distraction. Gozi, you are folding that fabric like you are dreaming. What is wrong with you? Nothing, Ma. Sorry, Ma. But something was wrong, something was right, something was happening somewhere, and Gozi had no control over it. Chin called every evening. Any news? Not yet. Don't worry. Good things take time. By Wednesday, Gozi had convinced herself that she had failed. The interview had been on Saturday. If they wanted her, they would have called by now. That was how these things worked, wasn't it? The good candidates got called quickly. The rejects were left to wonder. On Thursday, she stopped checking her phone. What was the point? She had done her best. It hadn't been enough. Life would continue as it always had. Market, exhaustion, worry, survival. On Friday, she came home from work to find her mother standing at the gate, her face alight with an expression Gozi had not seen in years. Mama? What is it? Are you okay? There was a call, Adana said, her voice trembling. From Lagos, from Amarapet. Gozi's heart stopped. And her mother's face broke into a smile so wide, so bright, it seemed to illuminate the entire compound. They want you. You passed the first interview. They want you to come for a second interview next week. Gozi stood frozen, the words not quite making sense. Passed. First interview? Second interview? And then the reality hit her, and she screamed. She screamed and laughed and cried all at once, grabbing her mother and spinning her around despite her frailty, despite her protests, despite everything. They stumbled together, clinging to each other, laughing and crying, as neighbors emerged from their compounds to see what the commotion was about. What happened? Someone called, "Is somebody dead? Somebody is alive?" Gozi shouted back, "Somebody is getting a job?" That night, Chin came over with plantain and ground nuts, and they celebrated in the small compound, the three of them, Gozi, her mother, and her best friend. They talked and laughed and dreamed, and for a few precious hours, the weight of the world lifted from Gozi's shoulders. But even as she laughed, a small part of her mind was already moving ahead. The first interview was just the beginning. The second interview would be harder, the competition stiffer. She could not afford to relax. She could not afford to celebrate too much. The battle was not over. It was just beginning. The second interview was scheduled for the following Thursday. Gozi spent the weekend preparing. She borrowed more clothes from Mrs. Okonkwo, a different suit this time, a soft gray that made her look serious and professional. She practiced interview questions with Chin, with Chuka, even with her mother. She read everything she could find about Amarapet, about the oil and gas industry, about the challenges facing indigenous companies in Nigeria. Chuka brought more information from his cleaners. The second interview, he learned, would be more technical. They would test her computer skills, her knowledge of basic office procedures, her ability to handle pressure. There might be a written test. There might be a group exercise. The HR manager, Mrs. Econom, Chuka reported. She liked you. The cleaners heard her talking to Mr. Adalik after the first interviews. She said you were raw but real. I don't know if that is good or bad. Gozi didn't know either, but she held on to the words, raw but real. She could work with that. Raw could be polished. Real could not be faked. On Wednesday night, the night before the second interview, Gozi knelt beside her bed and prayed as she had never prayed before. God of my fathers, she whispered, God who saw me through 5 years of university, through my father's death, through every closed door and broken promise. I am not asking for an easy path. I am not asking for shortcuts. I am just asking for a chance, one chance to prove myself, one chance to show that I can be something, do something, become something. Please, God, open this door. I promise I will walk through it with gratitude and humility. I promise I will use this opportunity to help my mother, to honor my father, to be a blessing to others. Please, God, just one chance. She prayed until her knees ached, until her voice was hoarse, until she had no words left. Then she lay down and slept, and for the first time in weeks she dreamed of her father. He was young in the dream, the way he had been in her childhood, before worry and age had carved lines into his face. He was smiling at her, that warm, proud smile that had always made her feel like the most important person in the world. My daughter, he said, my graduate daughter, I always knew you would make me proud. Papa, she tried to say, but no sound came out. He reached out and touched her face, his hand warm and solid. Go tomorrow and be yourself. That is enough. That has always been enough. And then he was gone, and Gozi woke to the first light of dawn, her face wet with tears, her heart filled with a peace she could not explain. She rose, washed, dressed, and prepared for the journey. Today was the day. Today everything would change. The second interview was held in a different part of the Amarapet building. While the first round had taken place in the standard interview rooms on the ground floor, the second was conducted on the 7th floor, in what appeared to be an actual office suite. The difference was immediate and intimidating. Here, the walls were paneled in dark wood, the furniture was heavy and expensive, and the windows offered a panoramic view of Lagos that made Gozi feel like she was floating above the city. There were only 8 candidates this time. Gozi recognized a few faces from the first interview, including Funmi, who spotted her immediately and waved excitedly from across the waiting area. Gozi, you made it. Funmi rushed over, her yellow dress replaced by a sophisticated navy blue sheath. I have been looking for you everywhere. Can you believe we are both here? God is good, Gozi said, and meant it. Out of 47 candidates, only 8 remained. The odds were getting better, but the competition was getting fiercer. The other 6 candidates looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. There was a young man in a bespoke suit who spoke on his phone in confident, technical English about downstream sector metrics. A woman in her late 20s with designer glasses and an air of cool competence scrolled through an iPad, occasionally making notes. Another candidate, a severe-looking lady with braids pulled tightly back, reviewed a binder stuffed with what appeared to be professional certifications. Gozi suddenly felt very small in her borrowed gray suit. Don't let them intimidate you, Funmi whispered, following her gaze. They may have money and connections, but they don't have what we have. What do we have? Funmi grinned, desperation, and desperation is a powerful motivator. Before Gozi could respond, a door opened and a young woman in professional attire called out, "Candidates, please follow me. You will be taking a computer-based test first, followed by individual panel interviews." The computer test was held in a sleek training room with 20 workstations. Gozi was directed to a computer and given login details. The test covered Microsoft Office applications, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, as well as basic typing speed and email etiquette. For the first 15 minutes, Gozi panicked. It had been over a year since she had used a computer regularly, and her fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard. The Word section asked her to format a document with specific fonts, margins, and headers, tasks that had seemed simple during her university days but now felt impossibly complex. She struggled through it, her heart pounding, certain that she was failing. Then came the Excel section. Spreadsheets had never been her strength, but she remembered enough to create basic formulas, to format cells, to create a simple chart. She worked slowly, carefully, checking each step before moving on. By the time she reached the typing test, her fingers had begun to remember. The words flowed more easily, the keys felt more familiar. She typed a passage about corporate social responsibility at 45 words per minute, not impressive by professional standards, but acceptable. When the test ended and the screen went blank, Gozi sat back in her chair, exhausted. Around her, the other candidates were rising, their expressions ranging from confident to troubled. The severe-looking lady with braids was frowning at her screen. The man in the bespoke suit was smiling smugly. Funmi caught Gozi's eye and mouthed, "How was it?" Gozi shrugged. She honestly didn't know. The panel interview was conducted by the same three people, Mrs. Econom, Mr. Adalik, and Dr. Obiageli, but this time the questions were different, sharper, more personal. Gozi was the fifth candidate to be called. By then she had watched for others emerge with expressions that revealed nothing. She had prayed, paced, and prayed again. When her name was called, she walked into the room with her head held high and her heart in her throat. "Miss Okafor," Mrs. Econom began without preamble, "your computer test results were adequate, not exceptional, but adequate. Your typing speed needs improvement, and your Excel skills are basic at best. Why should we hire someone with such limited technical abilities?" Gozi had prepared for this. Chuka had warned her that the second interview would test her ability to handle criticism and pressure. "Ma, you are right," she said calmly. "My computer skills are not where they should be. I have not had regular access to a computer since I left university. But skills can be learned. I learned 2-fold fabrics perfectly in 1 week at the market. I learned to calculate prices in my head faster than a calculator in 1 month. If you give me this job, I will take every training opportunity you offer. I will stay late to practice. I will become proficient because I have no other choice. Failure is not an option for me." Mr. Adalik leaned forward. "The oil and gas industry is demanding. There will be late nights, tight deadlines, difficult stakeholders. How do you know you can handle that pressure when your only work experience is in a market?" Gozi met his gaze. "Sir, with respect, you have never worked in a market. I have. I have stood on my feet for 12 hours with no break, no lunch, no water, because if I sat down, my boss would scream at me. I have handled customers who insulted me, who accused me of cheating, who threatened to destroy the shop because they were unhappy with a price. I have had money stolen from the shop and had to work extra weeks to pay it back even though it was not my fault. I have walked home through dangerous streets at night because I worked late, too tired to be afraid." She paused, letting her words sink in. The pressure in an office with air conditioning and regular breaks and respectful colleagues. That pressure I can handle. That pressure will feel like a holiday. For the first time since Gozi had met her, Mrs. Econom's lips twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was something close. "Tell us about a time you failed," Dr. Obiageli said, "and what you learned from it." Gozi thought for a moment. There were so many failures to choose from. Failing to save her father, failing to find a job after graduation, failing to earn enough to properly care for her mother, but she knew they wanted a professional failure, not a personal one. "When I first started at the boutique," she said slowly, "I failed to stand up for myself. A customer accused me of shortchanging her, and even though I knew I was right, I apologized and gave her money from my own pocket just to make the problem go away. My boss was furious not because I lost money, but because I let the customer walk all over me," she said. "In business, if you do not respect yourself, customers will not respect you either. And what did you learn?" "I learned that there is a difference between being humble and being a doormat. I learned that standing my ground respectfully and professionally actually earns more respect than backing down. I learned that conflict is not always bad. Sometimes it is necessary to establish boundaries. Since then, I have handled hundreds of difficult customers, and I have never backed down from a fair position. But I have also learned to listen, to compromise when appropriate, to know the difference between a battle worth fighting and one that is not." The questions continued for another 20 minutes. They asked about her long-term goals, her understanding of the oil and gas industry, her thoughts on teamwork, her biggest weaknesses, her proudest achievement. Each question Gozi answered honestly, drawing from her limited experience but infusing her responses with the passion and hunger that she hoped set her apart. When it was over, Mrs. Eckenham dismissed her with the same words as before. "You will hear from us within the week." But this time something in her tone was different. Warmer, perhaps, or maybe Gozi was imagining things. The waiting began again, and this time it was worse. The first interview had been a long shot, a dream she had barely allowed herself to believe in. But now she had passed one round, then another. Now she was one of 8, competing for perhaps 5 positions. The odds were good, dangerously good. Every day, Gozi checked her phone. Obsessively. Every time it rang, her heart stopped. Every time it was a wrong number or a credit alert or Chin calling to check in, the disappointment was physically painful. Mama Kelechi noticed her distraction and surprisingly said nothing. Perhaps she had heard through the market grapevine that Gozi was chasing something bigger. Perhaps she understood in her own way that this market girl would not be a market girl forever. On Tuesday, 5 days after the second interview, Gozi's phone rang at p.m. She was in the middle of serving a customer, a large woman who was taking forever to choose between 2 almost identical fabrics. The number on the screen was a Lagos landline. Gozi's heart stopped. "Hello?" she answered, her voice barely a whisper. "May I speak with Miss Gozi Okafor, please?" "This is she." "Miss Okafor, this is Mrs. Eckenham from Amarapet Exploration. I am calling to inform you that you have been successful in your interviews. We would like to offer you the position of Junior Administrative Officer, starting on Monday, March 31st. Your starting salary will be 180,000 naira per month plus benefits, including health insurance and transportation allowance. Do you accept?" The world stopped. The market noise faded. The customer demanding attention disappeared. Mama Kelechi's sharp voice calling for her became distant static. There was only the voice on the phone and the words that seemed too impossible to be real. "Miss Okafor, are you still there?" "Yes," Gozi managed. "Yes, I accept. Thank you so much. Details will be sent to you via email and text. Please report to the HR office at AM on Monday. Bring your original documents for verification. Congratulations, Miss Okafor. We look forward to having you on the team." The line went dead. Gozi stood frozen, the phone pressed to her ear, even though the call had ended. Around her, the market continued its chaotic dance, oblivious to the fact that in one small corner of it, a miracle had just occurred. "Gozi, Gozi." The customer was waving a hand in front of her face. "Are you deaf? I am talking to you." Gozi looked at the woman, at the fabric in her hands, at the shop that had been her prison for the past year, and suddenly she laughed, a loud, joyous, uncontrollable laugh that made the customer step back in alarm. "I got the job," Gozi said, still laughing, tears streaming down her face. "I got the job at Amarapet." The customer stared at her. Mama Kelechi emerged from the back of the shop, her expression curious. Other shopkeepers, hearing the commotion, began to gather at the entrance. "What is all this noise?" Mama Kelechi demanded. Gozi turned to her, still laughing and crying at once. "Mama, I got a job, a real job, at an oil company. I am leaving the market." For a long moment, Mama Kelechi said nothing. Her face was unreadable, and Gozi braced herself for the usual harshness, the sharp words, the accusations of ingratitude. But instead, Mama Kelechi smiled. It was the first time Gozi had ever seen her smile, and it transformed her face completely. The hardness melted away, replaced by something warm, almost maternal. "I knew it," Mama Kelechi said softly. "The first day you walked into my shop, I knew you would not stay. Educated ones like you are just passing through. The market is for people like me, people with no other options. You were meant for bigger things." She walked over to Gozi and, to everyone's shock, embraced her. It was a brief, awkward hug, but it was real. "Go well, my daughter. And when you become a big woman in that oil company, do not forget us small people, eh?" Gozi hugged her back, tears still flowing. "I will never forget, Mama, never." That evening, the compound was filled with people. News traveled fast in the neighborhood. By the time Gozi arrived home, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors, friends, even some of her father's old colleagues who had not visited since the burial. They came with gifts, a bag of rice, some tomatoes, a live chicken that squawked indignantly in its rope leash, envelopes containing small amounts of money for transport. Chin was there, of course, having closed her shop early to celebrate. She had brought her entire family, her mother, her father, her numerous siblings, and they filled the compound with laughter and noise. Adana sat on her usual spot on the concrete wall, wrapped in her best wrapper, her face glowing with a happiness that made her look years younger. She received the congratulations of the visitors with quiet grace, but her eyes kept seeking out Gozi, as if to reassure herself that this was real, that her daughter had actually done it. When the crowd finally thinned and only the closest friends and family remained, Adana called Gozi to sit beside her. "My daughter," she said, taking Gozi's hand, "your father is smiling in heaven today. I know it. He always said you would do great things. He always believed." Gozi leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was fading, leaving behind a deep weariness and an even deeper gratitude. "Mama, we are going to be okay now. With this salary, I can get you proper treatment. I can take you to a real hospital, see real doctors. You will get better." Adana was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "My daughter, I am already better. My child has succeeded. That is the best medicine any mother can receive." They sat together in the darkness, mother and daughter, as the stars emerged one by one above them. The night was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant music from a neighbor's radio, and for the first time in over a year, Gozi felt at peace. The next day, Gozi gave her formal notice to Mama Kelechi. The boutique felt different now, smaller somehow, as if her success had already begun to distance her from this world. She folded fabrics for the last time, served her last customers, endured her last hours on her feet without complaint. At the end of the day, Mama Kelechi called her aside. "I have something for you," she said, reaching under her counter and pulling out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Open it when you get home. And remember what I told you when you become big. Do not forget us." Gozi tried to protest, but Mama Kelechi waved her away. "Go, your mother is waiting." And Gozi, "Yes, Mama? Work hard, make us proud." That night, Gozi opened the package. Inside was a beautiful piece of Ankara fabric, the most expensive in the shop, in a pattern she had admired many times but could never afford. Tucked into the fabric was an envelope containing 5,000 naira, more than 2 weeks of her salary at the boutique. A note was scrawled on the envelope. In Mama Kelechi's shaky handwriting, "For your first week's transport, make us proud." Gozi cried again that night, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude, of hope, of a future that suddenly seemed bright and possible. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Gozi washed and ironed her borrowed suits, preparing them for Monday. She gathered her original documents, certificates, birth certificate, NISC discharge letter, and placed them in a new folder she had bought from the market. She planned her route to Amarapet, calculating the time she would need to leave, the buses she would take, the contingencies for traffic and delays. On Sunday evening, Chin came over with a small cake she had bought from a bakery in town. It was just a simple sponge cake with white icing, but to Gozi it looked like the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. They ate the cake in the compound, just the three of them, Gozi, her mother, and Chin. They talked and laughed and dreamed about the future. Gozi would get her mother to the best hospital in Lagos. She would rent a proper apartment with running water and electricity that worked. She would pay back everyone who had helped her, Chin, Mrs. Okonkwo, even Mama Kelechi. "And you will find a husband," Chin added mischievously, "a rich one with a car and a house." Gozi laughed. "One thing at a time, a beg. Let me start the job first." After Chin left, Gozi sat alone with her mother. The compound was quiet, the neighbors having retired to their rooms. A single bulb illuminated the small space, casting long shadows across the walls. "Mama," Gozi said softly, "I am scared." "Scared of what?" "My daughter. Scared that I will fail, scared that I am not good enough for this job, scared that they will find out I am just a market girl and send me away." Adana reached out and cupped Gozi's face in her hands. Her touch was gentle, her eyes warm. Listen to me, Gozi. You are not just a market girl. You are my daughter. You are Patrick Okafor's daughter. You are a university graduate with a second-class upper. You are a girl who survived a year in that market without giving up, without losing hope, without letting the world break her. You are more than enough. You have always been more than enough. Gozi leaned into her mother's touch, drawing strength from it the way she had as a child. Tomorrow, Adana continued, you will walk into that office with your head held high. You will remember that you earned this, not through connections, not through favors, but through your own hard work and intelligence. You belong there, Gozi. Never forget that. They prayed together then as they had done so many times before, but this time the prayers were different. They were not prayers of desperation, of begging for help. They were prayers of gratitude, of thanksgiving, of hope for the future. When Gozi finally lay down to sleep, she felt lighter than she had in years. Tomorrow her new life would begin. Tomorrow she would become the person her father had always believed she could be. She closed her eyes and slept, dreaming of nothing at all. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. Gozi woke before her alarm, her body accustomed to the early hours after a year in the market. She bathed carefully, dressed in her navy blue suit, and examined herself in the cracked mirror. The woman who looked back at her was different from the one who had left for the first interview. That woman had been hopeful but uncertain, dreaming of a future she could barely imagine. This woman was confident, ready, prepared. She kissed her mother goodbye, promising to call as soon as she arrived. Adana pressed a small bag into her hands, roasted plantain and ground nuts, just like before. For luck, she said, not that you need it. Gozi walked to the bus stop with a spring in her step. The world seemed different this morning, brighter, more colorful, full of possibility. The red soil of her father's compound, which had felt so heavy for so long, now felt like solid ground beneath her feet, the foundation from which she would launch herself into the future. The bus arrived, and she climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window as the vehicle lurched into motion, carrying her toward Lagos, toward Amarapet, toward her new life. Gozi whispered a prayer of thanks. Thank you, God. Thank you for this chance. I will not waste it, I promise. The bus rolled on, and behind her, the town of her struggles faded into the distance. Ahead lay the unknown challenges and opportunities, victories and setbacks, a future she could not predict but was finally ready to embrace. She was going to her dream job. Nothing could stop her now, a weekend of dreams. That weekend was a dream. Gozi prepared her new uniform, the navy blue skirt and white blouse, now impeccably ironed with a heavy charcoal iron. She packed a small lunch of boiled yam and egg sauce. She walked through their small home, touching the walls, whispering to them, "We are leaving this place soon. Just wait." She visited Chin to thank her properly. "My friend, just remember us small when you begin to chop life." Chin laughed, hugging her tightly. "But seriously, Gozi, you deserve this. After everything you have suffered, God is finally answering." On Sunday evening, she knelt beside her mother's bed and they prayed together. "God of mercy," her mother prayed, her voice cracking, "protect my daughter, open doors for her. Let this job be the beginning of our testimony. In Jesus' name." Gozi slept peacefully that night, her dreams filled with images of office buildings, computers, and a future where her mother smiled without pain. Monday would be her new beginning. The morning of the test Monday arrived with a sky the color of pearl. Gozi woke up before the first cockcrow, said a long, fervent prayer, and dressed with the care of a bride. She examined herself in the small, cracked mirror, navy blue skirt, white blouse, polished flats. She looked like the professional she was about to become. She kissed her mother goodbye. "I will call you when I get there, Mama. Rest well. Go with God, my daughter." She left the house while the world was still cloaked in the soft gray of dawn. The bus stop was a 15-minute walk away. She wanted to be early to make a perfect first impression. The air was cool, the streets were quiet, and her heart was full of hope. She walked at a brisk pace, her mind rehearsing the route she had mapped out, when something up ahead caught her attention. An old woman was outside a modest bungalow, struggling to drag a small, overfilled plastic bin to the edge of the road for the refuse truck. She was tiny, wrapped in a simple blue wrapper and a faded blouse. As Gozi drew closer, she saw the woman falter. The choice. The bin tipped over, spilling vegetable peels and empty milk tins onto the red earth, and the woman clutched her chest. Her face contorted in a silent grimace of pain, and her eyes, wide with fear, rolled back in her head. She crumpled to the ground like a discarded piece of cloth. For a second, Gozi froze. The world seemed to stop. Her eyes darted from the fallen woman to the road ahead. The bus to her new job, her future, her mother's salvation was somewhere out there. If she stopped, she would be late. The company was far. There was no way she could make it on time. She was a new employee on her very first day. What would they think of her? They would fire her before she even began. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen. The old woman was not her problem. Her mother was. But then she looked at the woman again. She saw not a stranger, but a mother, someone's grandmother, lying helpless on the cold, hard ground. The image of her own mother, frail and coughing in her bed, flashed in her mind. How could she pray for someone to help her mother if she herself walked past this one? The decision was made in a heartbeat. The cost of compassion, Mama. Mama, she cried, rushing to the woman's side. She knelt in the dirt, her crisp white blouse immediately staining with red earth and the bin's spillage. She didn't care. The old woman was breathing, but it was shallow and erratic, a terrifying flutter in her chest. She was unconscious. Help! Help me! Gozi screamed, her voice raw with panic. A few neighbors peered from their windows but didn't move. Frustrated, she flagged down a passing Keek Napep. The driver hesitated, but Gozi's urgency and promise of double payment moved him. Together, they lifted the old woman into the back. At the hospital, she helped the nurses, then waited in agonizing silence until the woman was stabilized. When she finally left for Amarapet, it was past a.m. She was over 3 hours late. At the company gates, her disheveled appearance drew suspicious looks. When she finally stood before the hiring manager, Mrs. Econom, her explanation was cut short. Miss Okafor, do you have any idea what time it is? It is almost M on your very first day of work. Gozi's tears began to flow freely. Ma, please, I am so sorry. There was an emergency. An old woman collapsed on the road. I had to take her to the hospital. I had to save her life. Leave this office immediately. Your employment is terminated. Gozi stood there, stunned into silence. She had traded her dream for a stranger. She had lost everything. The revelation. She trudged back to the hospital, a ghost of the hopeful girl who had left that morning. The old woman was no longer alone. Standing beside her bed, holding her hand, was a tall, distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored black suit. He had an air of quiet authority about him. He turned as Gozi entered. "Ah, here she is," the old woman exclaimed, her face brightening. "My son, this is the Good Samaritan I was telling you about. This is the girl who saved my life this morning." The man's stern face softened. He extended a hand. Thank you so much. My mother means the world to me. I am Emeka Amara, and I am eternally in your debt." Gozi shook his hand weakly, a fresh wave of sadness washing over her. The praise felt hollow. Her dream was dead. Mr. Amara saw the profound sadness in her eyes. "You saved my mother's life, and yet you look so sad. Why the long face? Please tell me." Gozi's composure finally broke completely. She sobbed, the story pouring out of her in a torrent. "I was on my way to my new job this morning. It was my first day at Amarapet, the oil company. But then your mother fell, and I had to stop. When I got to work, they fired me." Mr. Amara listened in silence. When she finished, a slow, warm smile spread across his face. "Miss Okafor, you are not losing your job today, not because of my mother. My name is Emeka Amara. Amarapet Exploration is my company, my family, and I own it. It pays to help others." The words hung in the air. Gozi blinked, her mind refusing to process them. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Of all the people in this vast, chaotic city, she had saved the mother of the man who owned the company that had just fired her. You own Amarapet?" she whispered, her voice choked with disbelief. "I do," he confirmed. "And you didn't just save any old woman this morning. You saved my mother. Now come." He gently took her elbow and led her, still dazed, out of the hospital and into his black Mercedes. When they pulled up to the Amarapet gate, every employee they passed bowed. The receptionist's jaw dropped. Mrs. Eckenham was at her office door, her professional smile freezing when she saw the disheveled girl beside the owner. Mrs. Eckenham, Mr. Amara said, his voice quiet but absolute. Be quiet. I want everyone to see this young woman. Her name is Gozi Okafor. She was late because she was saving my mother's life. She chose compassion over her own future. This is the kind of person we want at Amarapet. Effective immediately, she is being double promoted. She will report directly to the head of administration. See to it that her salary is adjusted accordingly and that she gets a company car. A collective gasp went through the office. Gozi stood there, tears of joy streaming down her face once more. As she looked at Mr. Amara and thought of his mother, peaceful in her hospital bed, a profound truth settled deep within her heart. It wasn't just a lesson about rewards. It was a realization that even in the darkest moment of desperation, choosing to be a light for someone else can illuminate a path you never knew existed. It truly pays to help others in need. Thank you so much for watching this story of Gozi's journey from the market to Amarapet. We hope you were inspired by her courage, her compassion, and her unwavering determination to succeed despite all odds. If you enjoyed this story, please show us some love. Like this video, it helps more people discover Gozi's story. Comment below, what did you think of the story? Which part touched you the most? Have you ever experienced a similar situation where helping someone led to unexpected blessings? Share with your friends and family. Someone out there needs to hear this message today. You never know who might be encouraged by Gozi's example of choosing kindness even when it seemed to cost her everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest uploads. We bring you new inspiring Nigerian stories every week.